Today on Secular, we break down the ACLJ's impact on foreign policy.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Secular. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
Hey, welcome to Seculo. One of the things we knew when the Biden administration came into power, President Biden, we know elections have consequences. It was a mess of an election, but ultimately President Biden's there. And where the president is most powerful, where they have the most unchecked power constitutionally and throughout the courts through court precedent, is in the realm of foreign policy. And we knew that the Biden administration's foreign policy would not just be bad, but dangerous. Dangerous foreign policy, begging the Iranians, which so far they have not been successful in doing, but they're still trying, begging the Iranians to let the U.S. back into their bullet point JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. They're still begging that. No response to China on the fact that COVID-19 is likely their responsibility. You look at the situation in the Middle East. They're against the fact that Jerusalem's been recognized as the capital of Israel. They've talked about trying to reopen a separate embassy in Israel just for Palestinians. And that was an embassy that's had a lot of problems because it was basically a pro-Palestinian U.S. outpost, which is not how any of our embassies should be. Now, we knew, again, whether it was Russian aggression, Chinese aggression, Taiwan, Ukraine, again, COVID, the Iranian nuclear situation, we knew that this administration was going to be a disaster. Okay. They have proven that to be the case. Now, they've been pretty ineffective. But at the ACLJ, we took direct action by beefing up our team at the highest level. So we brought on former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We brought on Rick Grenell, former Acting Director of National Intelligence and Ambassador to Germany. We were able to bring both of them on because we were in a financial position to do so. So when they are part of our team, they are not just guests on our radio broadcast. And I always want to encourage people to think past just the hour they see us a day on air or watch us or listen to us. They're not just coming on like guests of the broadcast. We are working with them behind the scenes. We're utilizing their expertise, their context, their knowledge in filings, in FOIA filings, for instance. We'll have them review to make sure we're not using words that would using the right language, taking it to the next level, if you will, at the ACLJ. But we were able to do that because even with COVID, even with the uncertainty surrounding the last election, people supported our work. They knew it was important to continue to support our work financially. So I thank all of you who did because we were able to make those moves. So this broadcast today, we're going to dive into all the foreign policy work that the ACLJ and our international affiliates is directly engaged in and how we've taken it to a next level. And so your financial support allows us to not just, again, and it's not just about bringing in Rick and Mike Pompeo. And again, I want to let you know, they are not just contributors to a radio broadcast. It's a senior counsel position and a senior advisor position. But also, the work that goes into that too, through our team, we're allowed to, there's more people that you don't see on the broadcast who support that additional work and expertise that we're able to bring in. So I encourage you, if you can, to support our work at ACLJ.org today. You can double the impact of your donation. We have a matching challenge at ACLJ.org. And if you're listening to the broadcast, I think you'll be encouraged as well to support our work as you hear all of what we're able to directly engage in internationally on foreign policy because of your support of the American Civil Law and Justice. We'll be right back on Secular.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The report is coming out. It shows that not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups.
It was something that no one could believe our government was even capable of doing, and now they were admitting it.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history. To take on the IRS and win, for the ACLJ, life has always been a top issue.
Barbara, I am here at this site because there are thousands of people and millions across America that say abortion's murder.
When you're fighting for the life of the unborn, you're on the right side of history, you're on the right side of law.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this. They're fighting for life to beat back the abortion juggernaut.
It's very important that we remain hopeful that the courts that the Trump administration was able to impact will give us good rulings that are based in law and sound reasoning.
This is one of the social issues we're winning.
There are historians that point out that religious persecution is at its highest level since the first 3 centuries when the Roman Empire led religious persecution.
A mid-state pastor's family is fighting to bring him home.
We are getting my husband after 7.5 months.
Turkey should not get away with holding my father one more day.
When Brunson was finally released, who meets him at the airport at 2:30 in the morning? Rick Brunell.
I saw Pastor Brunson walk down the stairs of the plane. I was filled with emotion. I told him that we were praying for him. The American people never forgot about him.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
Mike, one of the things that I am increasingly concerned about, and I think the country's increasingly concerned about, and that is the situation as it relates to China, in a couple of different avenues. One is, it seems like the Chinese Communist Party has been emboldened since Joe Biden's been president. They have consistently rebuffed efforts on the COVID-19 investigation. And it seems like the policies that you had in place as Secretary of State have pretty much been, I wouldn't say nullified, they're just not following up on it. What makes no sense to me is that we had, as I say you, but we as a country had such great success. What? Is it just anything that's the previous administration they don't want to touch?
So it may be that. I've certainly seen that in other places as well. But with respect to the Chinese Communist Party in particular, I think they just view it differently than we did. They view it the same way that the foreign policy establishment had viewed it for 40 years before the Trump administration as well, right? It is, if we just sell them some more trinkets, we've got to figure out how to get along. They're a big country. We can't upset the Chinese Communist Party. Our view was they have destroyed millions of jobs in the United States of America. They've stolen billions of dollars in wealth. They've now foisted this virus that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans upon us and covered it up. They're committing genocide in the western part of China. They want to take over an independent nation of Taiwan. They destroyed freedom in Hong Kong. This collective set of activities makes the Chinese Communist Party, if you add it to their military capability, the singular greatest threat to our freedom here at home. We were serious about responding to that. And while they've said a few things that are good in the Biden administration, there is no evidence they're prepared to execute on those things.
One of the things that I found fascinating on the Hong Kong situation was Hong Kong, which was a beacon of freedom, basically, in the metric of dealing with China. Because of the way the legalities were set up, where China was able to reassert control, was there anything that could have been done, do you think, to make that transition where it would not have foisted, basically, the Communist Party's control directly on Hong Kong like it has?
So it's a very difficult proposition, different than Taiwan. There are many more tools available for Taiwan. This was an internal negotiated agreement that had been made. And the Chinese clearly walked away from their part of the agreement with the United Kingdom and, frankly, with the world. So it was a difficult problem. We tried to support the freedom-loving people there. We tried to support Jimmy Lai. You all did good work on religious freedom there. Here at the ACLJ, that was an important part of what you were doing. So we tried to provide the underpinnings. But in the end, when Xi made the decision that he was going to use force and political power to overtake that and make it, frankly, Hong Kong now just another Chinese communist city, the tools that we had in our arsenal were pretty limited.
We know now, I mean, both administrations agreed that the Chinese are committing genocide. There's no mistake about that. That's one agreement between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. But the question, I think, for a lot of people is, have we gotten to the point of no return when it comes to holding the Chinese Communist Party and their leaders actually accountable for these actions? Can we do that? Is it possible to turn back this clock, if you will, with a new set of political leaders and a new set of policies?
You know, Jordan, it's a really important question. Everyone who's watching this today needs to understand that the magnitude of what is happening there rivals what happened in Europe in the 1930s. This is a problem of epic scale and a set of human rights violations that is, well, it's hard to even talk about, right? Forced sterilizations, women being forced to have abortions, internment, taking families apart on a scale of millions. So that requires a global response, certainly an American-led global response. There are things we can do. We can sanction leaders. We can convince them that commerce coming from that part of Western China is not going to flow not only to the United States, but to any place in the West. So impose a real economic cost on the Chinese leadership. There are a series of tools we could take, none of which require new laws. I think there'd be bipartisan support on Capitol Hill for this. But in the end, President Biden's got to make a decision. Does he want to just accept genocide as the standard practice for the Chinese Communist Party? Or is he going to take real actions that can convince them that they can't continue to do this?
You know, I want to switch our focus a little bit to the Middle East, because it's interesting that we're dealing with China in significant ways and have been. And then we have the situation with Iran and then the greater Middle East issue. I have said that Iran is the greatest exporter of terrorism in the world because they will support Hezbollah and they will support Hamas. When we look at Iran, we had this horrific Joint Comprehensive Plan, JCPOA, that was not even an agreement to supposedly slow down Iran's nuclear ambition. At the same time, I will never forget this. We had a pastor that was in jail. His name was Saeed Abedini. They finally got released. The first thing he told me when he got released, when he came to the United States, was, why in the world did the United States pay $1.8 billion to the Iranians? This literally, I'm on a conference call, you know, to this regime. Because, of course, he's looking at it as just this is more money for terrorism, more money for repression of freedom. So you look at the nuclear deal that the Biden administration seems to be bent on getting back into. Then there's these reports that the nuclear activities have been increasing. And on top of that, while the United States withdrew from the agreement, the rest of the European Union stayed in it. And the Iranians acknowledged they have not been following it. So why is this deal so important to this administration when we know the end result of it's going to be not followed? Why is this an Obama legacy issue for them?
Yes, 100%. This has become an article of faith for the left inside the foreign policy establishment. This was the greatest achievement of President Obama's second term. That's their term, not mine. So when we walked away from this was heretical. Getting back in it is absurd. I chuckle when you talked about Pastor Abedini. It's not funny. I chuckle because it is so absurd to think that we're going to buy our way out of the problem set with these mullahs in Iran. Just look at the binary change in Iranian behavior. We withdrew from the JCPOA and began to take down the capacity of the regime to conduct terror around the world and build their nuclear program. We had them to their last $4 billion of foreign exchange reserves. The new administration comes in and makes clear we're going to pay any price, bear any cost to get back into this deal. And the Iranians reject them. They continue to extract. So they've now received permission to receive some $7 billion from the frozen assets from Asia. They have conducted missile launches from Gaza Strip through their proxy terrorist Hamas into Israel. They're now hijacking ships off Fujairah in the open waters and international water space. The Iranian regime knows that they have a free hand, and the Americans are sitting at the table begging them to come back into this poorly constructed deal. It's an article of faith. There is no logic to it unless you believe the core proposition that Iran as a balancing actor, and I've heard some Democrats say this, we need Iran to be more powerful so they'll balance out the bad actors in Saudi Arabia and in the Emirates and in Israel. I think this is crazy. It's not in America's best interest, and yet I think there are some on the left who hold this view. It's by the way, last thing to say, it borders on anti-Semitic.
No, I think it does.
Because of the support for the most anti-Semitic regime in the Middle East, the Iranian regime, endangers Israel, makes it more likely that they have to actually attack the Iranian nuclear program, and puts at risk the Jewish homeland.
You know, it was interesting, as we were isolating Iran when you were Secretary of State, and we saw the benefits of that. And at the same time, we saw the Abraham Accords. So you had this significant development of Middle East, the progression of Middle East peace, with the Palestinian issue not resolved, because the Palestinians' leadership has to want to resolve it. And as we've seen in Oslo, as we've seen in the Camp David Accords, in the Y Agreement, in all of these, at the end of the day, when the Palestinian Authority is offered everything they've asked for, they still turn it down because they want, this is a business enterprise for them. But we saw the success of the Abraham Accords. How significant do you think that is?
very significant. I don't think it will unravel, because I think the people in Bahrain and the Emirates and in the other countries too, Jordan, Egypt, the places that have recognized Israel, Morocco, Sudan, I think they're all going to conclude this is in their best interest. But I will say this, the policies that are being put in place are back to the same Obama policies that threaten the Jewish right to their own space. The Abraham Accords and our Iran policy were deeply linked. Right. We'd love to resolve the Palestinian issue, but in the end, the Palestinian leadership has to make the case to their own people. This is where, too, the ACLJ has been very important. Remember, Israel is the one nation where Christians, Jews, Muslims can all worship. Right. The Israelis' right to these lands is pretty clear. They are not an occupying nation. This BDS movement, stuff that the ACLJ has been working on for an awfully long time. We have to stay after this. This administration will not defend these issues and not protect America and Israel. I'm so glad that you all are engaged on these issues.
We're dealing with one right now. And this is, you would think that how could this be an issue with Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company? Okay, so the Ben & Jerry's cancels, basically says if you're going to sell in the settlements, by the way, these settlements have 60, 70,000 people in them. These are not like tents pitched. These are villages and towns and cities.
These are cities.
We represent Gush Etzion Foundation. And it's got a storied history. But it's amazing to me that they, so we've got, I call it the ice cream diplomacy going on in the in Israel right now. But Jordan, go ahead.
It's interesting, Secretary Pompeo. You recently said if America is not strong, the world will be at the mercy of tyrants and enter an era we dare not imagine.
Look, that statement was both historical and predictive. Historical, we know when America is weak what happens. We know that we watch the Anschluss, we watch Sudetenland, right? We know what happens when we allow tyrants to roam free. And so if America is not leading, that in fact they'll have a lot of room to take away freedom here at home in the United States. In my time in service, both as CI Director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
The ACLJ's work at the UN, overseas with the European Court of Justice, is incredibly important.
We have on our team lawyers, non-lawyers as well, that are policy experts. They're all engaged in foreign policy issues.
We have been focused on protecting the nation state of Israel, particularly before the United Nations.
We don't shy away from the battles that are going on at the UN and just complain about them. We actually try to go in and do something positive and actually affect change.
The risk of an incomplete or unsolid relationship within the United States of America and Israel is real.
Israel is very important to the ACLJ, and we will always fight for Israel's rights.
We had a series of cases at the European Court of Human Rights, primarily dealing with religious liberty.
And as Secretary of State, I saw this too. Nations that had more religious freedom were on firmer footing. They had better democracies.
America has always been the world leader in religious liberties, in freedom of conscience and freedom of speech.
We've taken the First Amendment, and that has been our cornerstone. It's to defend the rights of people of faith and others that are having their rights abused.
We not only hold our government accountable, but we hold other governments accountable.
You have to keep the battle going when it's not cool anymore, when it's not the #1 story on TV. You have to actually be committed to fighting it out, or else you'll never win.
The ACLJ's front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. Go to aclj.org today. That's aclj.org.
Let's move to a discussion on religious liberty, because obviously that's one of the core reasons the ACLJ came into existence was the fight for religious liberty. It's now expanded globally. We talked before about, Israel's the only real democracy in the Middle East that allows the free exercise of religion for all faiths. It was interesting. The UN, they do these inspections and they call them reports. They're really like investigations on religious liberty. So we were asked, because our European Center for Law and Justice is a NGO with the UN, so we have status. So they asked us to help put together the Israel dossier, basically the report. But it was being done by their people, and they wanted to meet and have us help set up meetings. They had other groups do it too, but we played a large role. Interestingly, they wanted to meet with Christians in the West Bank or Gaza. This is part of what they wanted to do. So they said that we just want to go there and interview them. I said, wait a minute. You don't just go there and interview them. They're not openly practicing their religion in the West Bank and Gaza, especially in Gaza, but the West Bank too, because Hamas has pretty much taken over the West Bank, as you know. So we had them meet with pastors on an olive grove outside of Bethlehem. So when we look at the issue of religious freedom and religious persecution, which we've handled globally, I want to start again with China. You said it, we've said it, we continue to say it. They are practicing religious persecution at a level that we cannot imagine. We've been to China. I spoke at a conference supported by the Chinese government and the Peking University, Chinese government basically. And it was on religious liberty, First Amendment. They had judges come in, U.S. judges come in, Court of Appeals judges. It was a very, well done event. The Attorney General and his staff, there was probably 1,500 people in attendance. But what was interesting was I met with some of the leaders of the house churches, which people don't have an understanding what those house churches. It's not 10 people in a room underneath. I mean, it may be 2 floors of an office building. But they're not openly do it. They do have the Three Self-Patriotic Christian Church, which is the official Christian church, the government church. What was so incredible to me was they said, well, where do you want to worship that Sunday? And I said, let's go to the I want to see what it's like at the Three Self-Patriotic Church. So we go there, and the pastors, songs you'd recognize being sung obviously in Chinese, but you know the hymns, and pastor starts a sermon, and it seems like a pretty regular sermon. I mean, it was a decent sermon that stops in the middle of it. And says, of course, none of this would exist. He's talking about salvation. He's talking about faith. None of this would exist without, then goes into the whole Chinese Communist Party discussion. So when you look at, you said oppression, persecution, genocide, the religious persecution in China is real.
It's real and growing.
Yes.
I know many folks who have gone to China over the last 30 years as missionaries, as pastors, to try and build up faith communities, to take Bibles. They will all tell you that today is worse than it was 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. The room for freedom to practice faith is now grossly limited and dangerous. We've seen this happen to young people who come to the United States and who just want to go back there and preach the Lord. Or we've had folks who want to go over there and talk about Islam inside the country. No opportunity to do so. It is as repressive a regime when it comes to religious freedom as any place in the world. And I'd add one thing. We need every person of faith working on this set of issues. Yes. The ACLJ has an important role there, but the churches themselves, including the Catholic Church, needs to bear witness to this horror.
One last thing on that. We've got a case right now involving a Chinese pastor, Pastor John Saul. He has American green card. He was living in the United States, going back to China, doing basically mission work. Gets picked up, charged, put in prison. And I think it's going on to year 4 now. We've taken it to the UN's arbitrary detention panel. They said he's being detained unlawfully. Of course, China doesn't respond to that. We got involved in the case right as towards the end of the administration. Your administration, the previous administration, your administration as Secretary of State was very, very helpful. And then, of course, now we're basically stone silent with the current one. I mean, you talk China and Christians and religious persecution. It's like for both.
They're out.
So that's just part of the problem that we're seeing.
I mean, the idea that the religious freedom is central to human rights, that if you can't have a country where there's real human rights without religious freedom and religious liberty.
It is a core belief of mine. It was a core piece of understanding of the State Department under President Trump. It was work that we were doing to acknowledge that America is better off, right? We always talked about America first. America is better off when nations around the world permit their people to practice their faith in the way that they want to. The nations are more stable, their people are happier. Economic growth, all these data sets revolving around allowing folks to practice their faith. And so we worked diligently on it. We had a big team. We had ministerials. We brought people all across the world. It was a real priority. President Trump was the first president ever to go to the United Nations General Assembly and talk about religious freedom. This is an important part of who we are as Americans, and it's both moral and correct, but it's also a good thing for American freedom and safety.
I reflect sometimes on what it took for us to get our European Center for Law and Justice accredited with the United Nations. Well, it was a multi-year process with multiple hearings, and I'll never forget when we finally got it. We were before the General Assembly that approves this, and every conceivable group with the strangest things were being approved as NGOs.
Yes.
And it was us, and I believe it was us and the Jewish National Fund that both were, abstains, denies. Of course, part of the problem was we had sued Turkey, we had sued Russia, we had we brought litigation in international tribunals, so they weren't friendly. We finally got it, but we got it by force. I mean, we went in there, and I told the whoever was the presiding president at that particular time that we're not leaving without it because there's no justification for this. None. You're approving all these other groups, and it's starting to look like it's a little bit of anti-Semitism because we have an office in Jerusalem. Finally, we got it. I'm going to turn it to a case that you worked on with us very closely. I mean, a miracle case, Pastor Andrew Brunson. So here we have an American citizen, been practicing his faith, feels called to the mission field. He goes to Turkey, starts a church in Izmir, 23 years, no problem. All of a sudden, gets picked up by Turkish forces, jailed, in prison, trial starts. We're working with Turkish lawyers on the trial. We're working very closely with you and your team and the White House for his release. Turkey was a NATO ally. Without disclosing things we can't disclose, he was a political pawn. That's what my sense of it is, because I was on some of the calls, was that they were using Brunson as a negotiating tool with the United States, the Turks.
So we had many complex issues with the Turks. They were a NATO ally, but they were also engaged in activities that we didn't want them to be engaged in. I think President Erdogan knew that, and so yes, he was looking for points of leverage where he had capacity to impact how we were thinking about our decision-making process. So it was most unfortunate. They picked him up because they knew he would be important to the United States of America. And God bless President Trump. We got this right. We made clear this was unacceptable, and we began to do the things that I was just talking about. You have to use the tools of power that the United States has, and President Trump was prepared to do that by sanctioning senior Turkish officials to convince President Erdogan that he needed to allow Pastor Brunson to come home.
I'm chuckling a little bit because I was on one of those calls with when the president was talking to President Erdogan. He tells Erdogan, who doesn't know who this person is, he goes, I want you to know, if he's not released by the end of this week, this will be the most expensive pastor you've ever detained, and he'll be more famous than Billy Graham, which I don't know if that relates to Erdogan. But I remember the economic impact. Financial Times runs an article that says, a release that says, J Secular indicates a possible release of Pastor Brunson is imminent. Turkish lira increases in value.
Here's what I want to say to our ACLJ members, or for those of you that enjoy watching this broadcast. Whether it is going after the deep state, whether it is litigation that we're engaged in, whether it is defending the persecuted church and getting individuals out of prison because of their faith in other countries, whether it's training lawyers to fight for religious liberty, not just here in the United States, but around the globe, whether it is producing a daily, 5 days a week, 1 hour live television and radio broadcast heard on thousands of radio stations, on TV platforms, on social media platforms. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. We want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. And when you do that, you're supporting our production teams, our videos, whether it's that kind of production and other things that we are working on. The ACLJ is front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Go to ACLJ.org today. That's ACLJ.org.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
Hey, welcome to Seculo. One of the things we knew when the Biden administration came into power, President Biden, we know elections have consequences. It was a mess of an election, but ultimately President Biden's there. And where the president is most powerful, where they have the most unchecked power constitutionally and throughout the courts through court precedent, is in the realm of foreign policy. And we knew that the Biden administration's foreign policy would not just be bad, but dangerous. Dangerous foreign policy, begging the Iranians, which so far they have not been successful in doing, but they're still trying, begging the Iranians to let the U.S. back into their bullet point JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. They're still begging that. No response to China on the fact that COVID-19 is likely their responsibility. You look at the situation in the Middle East. They're against the fact that Jerusalem's been recognized as the capital of Israel. They've talked about trying to reopen a separate embassy in Israel just for Palestinians. And that was an embassy that's had a lot of problems because it was basically a pro-Palestinian U.S. outpost, which is not how any of our embassies should be. Now, we knew, again, whether it was Russian aggression, Chinese aggression, Taiwan, Ukraine, again, COVID, the Iranian nuclear situation, we knew that this administration was going to be a disaster. Okay. They have proven that to be the case. Now, they've been pretty ineffective, but at the ACLJ, we took direct action by beefing up our team at the highest level. So we brought on former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We brought on Rick Grenell, former Acting Director of National Intelligence and Ambassador to Germany. We were able to bring both of them on because we were in a financial position to do so. So when they are a part of our team, they are not just guests on our radio broadcast. And I always want to encourage people to think past just the hour they see us a day on air or watch us or listen to us. They're not just coming on like guests of the broadcast. We are working with them behind the scenes. We're utilizing their expertise, their context, their knowledge in filings, in FOIA filings, for instance. We'll have them review to make sure we're not using words that would using the right language, taking it to the next level, if you will, at the ACLJ. But we were able to do that because even with COVID, even with the uncertainty surrounding the last election, people supported our work. They knew it was important to continue to support our work financially. So I thank all of you who did, because we were able to make those moves. So in this broadcast today, we're going to dive into all the foreign policy work that the ACLJ and our international affiliates is directly engaged in and how we've taken it to a next level. And so your financial support allows us to not just, again, and it's not just about bringing in Rick and Mike Pompeo. And again, I want to let you know, they are not just contributors to a radio broadcast. It's a senior counsel position and a senior advisor position. But also, the work that goes into that too, through our team. We're allowed to, there's more people that you don't see on the broadcast who support that additional work and expertise that we're able to bring in. So I encourage you, if you can, to support our work at aclj.org today. You can double the impact of your donation. We have a matching challenge at aclj.org. And if you're listening to the broadcast, I think you'll be encouraged as well to support our work as you hear all of what we're able to directly engage in internationally on foreign policy because of your support of the American Center for Law and Justice. We'll be right back on Second Amendment.
I was at a board meeting at Youth for Jesus, and the executive director said, we've got a case. The Supreme Court had just granted review. It was about literature distribution at airports.
We wanted to have the Bible study meet in the school, but it turned into a problem when the principal said, no, you can't have it.
I told her that I wanted to sing Noel, and she said, the principal said that we can't have anything to do with Christ in our songs.
We marched around the country defending evangelism in Chicago, in Boston, in New York, Atlanta, Texas, Southern California, Northern California, and points in between.
We got a letter one evening from the IRS saying they wanted all this information that we all knew immediately was not right.
How do you fight the government? How do you fight the IRS?
Tea Party groups say they're being targeted by the Internal Revenue Service, and they're enlisting the aid of the American Center for Law and Justice.
They were trying to shut groups down that they disagreed with. This was very, very serious.
The federal courts do not need to become monitors of state trespass actions, and that's all this is.
We were looking for the right to speak our minds and our consciences, and we won that right today.
Religious persecution is a situation where your life is literally put in jeopardy simply because of what you believe.
Can you help? Can you do something? He's on death row, and so we launched an international campaign. His freedom now rests solely on diplomatic efforts by the United States government and world leaders dedicated to human rights.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
There was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, we're really out of Turkey and free again.
say all the tools in the arsenal. Was that the kind of global the approach you took in dealing with these persecution cases?
It was. We did this everywhere. I'll say two things that reminds me of. First, it was always so important for us to be connected to groups like the ACLJ, who had feet on the ground, who knew things, who had nuanced understandings of the situation that sometimes we didn't have in government. Sometimes we knew things that you all didn't know. But working together collectively, we could present to these nations the demands that the American people rightly expect their leaders to do. And so we did this. In Pastor Brunson's case, you described it as a miracle. I certainly consider it so. We used the tools that the United States has and in its arsenal to successfully deliver an American home to freedom, back to his family, back to his ability to practice his faith. I've seen the good work he's out there doing. I'm really proud of the work that President Trump and our team did.
The moment in the White House when Andrew Brunson prayed for the president, you were there, C.C. Howe from our office was there. What was that like?
It was one of the highlights of my time in my 4 years serving the administration to know that the work that went into that, my team on the ground in the embassy, they were good. They did very, very nice work all along building, and then the work that we did with the private sector, the public language that was taking place too. You talked about whether he knew who Billy Graham was or not. His team knew who Billy Graham was. His team knew that there would be moral harm to their nation if they didn't let him go. That collective power brought this man of Jesus to the Oval Office that day, and to get the chance to be there as he prayed for the president was remarkable.
And the power of social media, we've seen the power when it's shut off, but also the power of social media. Both times those were made publicly by the president too, as a tweet to the world saying, first it's going to be sanctions. He named the officials, and they were sanctioned the next day. And then he said the next day would actually be by tweet the entire country. And it's so whatever was going on also behind the scenes, publicly, we had a very strong stand from our president, who was putting out this stand in his own words, saying this is how much it's worth to me and our country to see, one, get our American citizen home, but two, to stand up for religious liberty.
We were always very careful too. No tweet went out, no démarche was issued, no red line drawn unless we were prepared to deliver on it.
Right.
One of the things I've watched this administration do is say, we're going to do X, and then the other team runs through the line and they don't do X. This is really dangerous. We were very clear. We were measured. We were thoughtful. But when we said we were going to do something in the event that there was some condition that wasn't met, President Trump always followed through.
I want people to understand, though, that are watching this, especially our ACLJ members, that while we don't have Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State and Donald Trump's not the president, and we've got another administration in there, the fact that these people are still being persecuted means we still have to be working on this. We have to use different avenues. But the issue of religious persecution, religious liberty is so central to mankind and to freedom and liberty. So I want people, because you've worked inside the government, outside. So when the government's not your friend, so to speak, you still have to do the work.
Yeah, now more than ever, right?
Yeah,
This is the central thesis, that the work required has to be redoubled. This administration has people inside of it who want to work on this. We need to enable them to. We need to encourage them. We need to prod them. And when they get it right, we need to applaud them. But it's the case. It's going to require more private activity. We created these religious freedom ministerials. I refer to it, building religious freedom. We now brought it outside to civil society. That they weren't going to follow through on this inside of government, so we brought it out and held the first big event 2 months ago.
Right.
This work is required. The need for religious freedom didn't go away when the Trump administration ended, and so it will now take even more effort, more resources, more energy to promoting this cause.
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe even more so when you've got to use different avenues to get the job done.
One of the issues that's key to the ACLJ Secretary Pompeo is the defense of the unborn. And you've made that comment that we went from the most pro-life administration in our nation's history to the most pro-abortion and extremely hostile administration. It's not just President Biden saying he's pro-abortion and putting in some actors that have come from that world. He has put in activists from the pro-abortion world, from the world of Planned Parenthood, especially Becerra at HHS, at Health and Human Services, who have taken an actual hostile view to pro-life Americans. And we recently just saw a nurse in Vermont, a client of ours, didn't want to file the civil lawsuit because she wanted to maintain her job, but utilized a new vehicle that was set up under the Trump administration at HHS to file a complaint because she was forced to perform an abortion procedure, even though she was on the list of people at the hospital with conscience protections. Department of Justice was actively engaged in a legal fight. They're about to file the lawsuit, and now they've pulled out and asked to dismiss. I mean, that's the difference between just one example of the previous administration and the current administration, not even standing up for an American's individual rights to have that pro-life conviction.
These folks on abortion are radical. This isn't just going back from where we were, radically pro-life. This is not back to the middle. This is absolute hostility, used exactly the right word, whether it's denying this person to exercise their own conscience rights, promoting and funding and underwriting the right. They're trying to get rid of the Hyde Amendment that's been law for years that prevented taxpayer money from going to abortions. They want to repeal the Hyde Amendment. Frankly, it was largely bipartisan for all of these years. They want to undo that. They are now actively taking U.S. taxpayer dollars abroad and using them to support groups who are promoting abortion all over the world. Now, we were talking about what's happening in the Chinese Communist Party, right, where they're forcing women to have abortions. We now have an administration that is actively promoting the destruction of human life in a way that is so antithetical to, I think, what most Americans' common sense would tell them. This is dangerous. It is a radical shift, and it's why the work that has to be done by groups like the ACLJ today is so imperative. We have to protect every unborn life.
You know, Jordan mentioned Becerra, the HHS secretary, so we took him to the Supreme Court about a year and a half ago.
I remember that.
He was fighting. This was so absurd. It wasn't on Roe versus Wade. It was he had mandated, as Attorney General, that warning statements be placed inside pro-life crisis pregnancy center, women's centers, saying, we don't give abortions. Here's the place to get your abortion. We don't give abortions. It's called compelled speech, which the Supreme Court for 150 years says you can't do that. So we take him to the Supreme Court of the United States. We win. And his reward for taking that position is he's the HHS secretary. I mean, it is incredible.
It's remarkable. Warning: we have a dangerous HHS secretary.
Yeah, that's what we should be. That's what we should be posting. We do see the importance of the judiciary as it relates to the life issue, which means the consequence of an election for president is the appointment of Supreme Court justices, and that fundamentally is one of the lasting legacies of any president.
It is. And I pray that the three that President Trump got, we were very blessed to get three. Not many presidents get that. I pray that those three come to deliver on the constitutional commitments that they made during their confirmation hearings. If you listen to them, they were all deeply respectful of the Constitution. If one respects our Constitution, then Roe can't stand.
Yeah, Roe, you know, even there are liberal scholars that have said Roe's underpinnings were constitutionally suspect.
No, it's a horribly decided case. As a constitutional matter, wholly apart from the life issue that it surrounds. I hope that they'll do this. I hope they'll be thoughtful. I hope that they will deeply consider that we've been living under this now for decades. It's wrongly decided. They should go fix it, just as in the great historic cases have been fixed before, and then return this. That's what Roe will do, is return states the power
to decide
what they want to do. This would be a huge step forward for both our constitutional jurisprudence and for the protection of the unborn.
It also would reduce the number of abortions, because the numbers of abortions were being significantly reduced in the last several years. The trend line has been that way. A little known fact with Harry Blackmun in the writing of Roe v. Wade, I've argued enough abortion cases up there that I've studied Justice Blackmun. And Harry Blackmun spent the summer preparing for his opinion, knowing the case was going to be on the docket. I think it may have been in the fall, he went up to the Mayo Clinic, to the medical library. Now, that's a dangerous move when a justice of the Supreme Court starts reading the medical literature, the peer-reviewed journals. And then he came to this, three-trimester approach to it, which has no constitutional underpinning. But, again, as we've said, the lasting legacy of a president is the Supreme Court justices. It doesn't predict how they would vote in a particular case. Of course. We never ask, and I've been involved as a lawyer advising presidents on Supreme Court justices, including these Supreme Court justices. But the fact of the matter is this: we never ask how they would rule in Roe versus Wade. The Democrats always ask how they're going to.
No, the hypocrisy's crazy. Two things that you made me think of there, Jay. If you went to the medical literature today, no one disputes that these are lives.
Right.
The science, our knowledge has grown
because
so
of the imaging.
Much because the imaging in these 45, 50 years is just. No one could go to the Mayo Clinic today and not walk away saying that these are lives that deserve to be brought from the womb alive. The second thought, your point about how we approach the court. We approach the court from an understanding of our American history and our founding. If these justices will simply return to that, our constitutional documents, Roe will vanish, and these babies will be born.
For 30 years, the American Center for Law and Justice has been dedicated to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms. Because of you, we've seen great success in the courts and Congress concerning the issues that matter most to you and your families. ACLJ Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow.
Our decades-long commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law is at the center of everything we do. The bottom line, our work could not take place without your generous support.
It's a critical time for our nation and our world. With so many challenges facing our country, the work of the American Center for Law and Justice has never been more important. There's no better way to support the ACLJ than through online giving.
We truly appreciate your financial support. Without it, it would be impossible to do our work here and around the globe. And the best way to support our work is to make your financial gifts online at aclj.org.
Donating online is safe and secure, and an online gift at aclj.org can be put to work immediately, enabling the ACLJ to continue the battle against abortion giant Planned Parenthood.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
To protect Christians facing persecution.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, they were getting all this out.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
To stand up for our good friend Israel. To work to uncover the corrupt deep state in Washington, and so much more. Take part in our matching challenge today. You can make a difference in the work we do. Give a gift today online at aclj.org.
One last issue on the life issue is that we know that there are a couple of cases that the left is watching very closely, and they're watching them to see, could this be the way we make the move to get rid of the filibuster and put in place, pack the court?
Yeah.
And a lot of we've been doing a lot of education on this because people think, well, that's really got to take a constitutional amendment. And it doesn't. It's an act of Congress. We have a divided Congress right now, right on that line. But they are looking to these cases. I mean, to me, though, that
Almost
is
as an excuse.
As an excuse, as a way to say, I don't even know if they care with the outcome so much as a reason to even have this discussion. But it's a real discussion happening right now.
I chuckle. I remember reading the New York Times and the Washington Post almost every day. The Trump administration is tearing down American institutions. They have no respect for the Constitution, no respect for our history and our tradition. These folks come in and want to add a state, destroy the filibuster, right?
Pack the court.
Pack the court. I mean, the list is endless of institution destruction that's being put under the guise of the left or because COVID, whatever the storyline of the day may be. These folks that aren't respecting our tradition. You're right about the courts. They are so powerful, so important, and elections matter because President Trump was able to put a whole bunch of judges on district courts and appellate judges across America, too. This will have a profound impact on our country.
Jefferson said he thought, the judiciary was going to be the weakest branch of government. Yeah. Well, it didn't work out that way. But what's interesting about the court for just a moment is that in a lot of of course, it's been an unusual 2 years of argument. I did 3 of them on the phone. I mean, it's a dip because of the pandemic. And when I look at the court now, to compare where it was even, 5-6 years ago, it's a very different court. I mean, your administration got 3 Supreme Court justices, countless courts of appeals, and district court judges. In all those matters, most cases don't go to the Supreme Court. But let me just ask you this. What would, if you were the President of the United States and you were interviewing a Supreme Court justice, a potential nominee, what is the key thing? You don't ask on a particular case. What would you be asking them?
I want to make sure that they shared my understanding of our Constitution and the court's role in interpreting that Constitution, and frankly, an understanding of the things Congress is permitted to do and not do as well. We've allowed so much of the administrative state to rise up because we've deferred somehow to this idea that we can have elected officials engaged in activity that impacts privacy and freedom and liberty all across the United States of America. It has diminished our country. So a deep understanding of the Constitution, enough intellect to make sure that they can smell a phony story when they get one presented by a very talented lawyer who's sure to come before them.
Yep.
And then the last thing would be a courage. Courage to know, right, this is not a court that should be deciding based on what the people of the United States are thinking at any given moment,
or what the Washington Post is writing,
Washington Post is writing, or what the rally on the steps of the courthouse is.
Right.
Those are small but loud voices. They need to go back to the original understanding. If we get that piece right, these justices will serve us well.
Secretary Pompeo, you led the CIA, State Department. You understand running massive bureaucracies where it's not always that the bureaucrats working there have the same idea, and sometimes they are even working against the positions of the administration that they are supposed to be serving. We certainly have saw that under the Trump administration, where it seemed like people were trying to undermine constantly, but that it was always a Washington problem. But it seemed like it was just exploded under the Trump administration. There's the idea that these bureaucrats felt like they could be leaking to the press, classified information, just to undermine. And I know that's not most probably people working there, but there were certainly enough, and they're still there today. While politicians come and go and elected officials come and go, they remain in Washington, and they feel like they run it, even though that they are not the chosen people to run these. So what was that like, that play, coming in knowing that there's a lot of these people were pretty hostile to the policies you wanted to put in place?
Yeah, it was tough. There's no doubt about it. Your point's well taken. There are good people working at the State Department who are trying to execute the president's mission, but there were an awful lot who were resistant to most everything we were trying to do. I think it was especially true of the Trump administration. We were breaking a lot of glass. We talked about the Middle East. We talked about our policy in North Korea a little bit. Where we were taking positions that were at odds with a 40, 50-year Washington, D.C. foreign policy establishment. And if there's any place in the world that is the D.C. establishment, it's the State Department. Right. And so it was, there was enormous resistance. And so they tried to undermine in so many different ways. My mission set every day was just to make sure that I understood the president's command and intent clearly, and then to make the machine go perform that function. So we tried to get everyone on that page. That's our responsibility. Right? The president was elected. He was the duly elected president of the United States. Our responsibility is to execute the foreign policy that he lays out. And I tried to remind everyone that we are there for a moment in time, that this is our place, and we are to do what the people have asked our leadership to do. It's a real challenge.
In talking about foreign affairs, we often talk about these governments having, we'll say in Turkey, there's volumes written on the deep state, the state that runs the underlying bureaucrats that run Turkey, that you may have an agency saying one thing, but here's what's really happening. But we kind of have a little bit of a deep state situation in some agencies in the United States. And I'm not talking about conspiracies. I'm talking about reality. You call it whatever you want, but I'll give a for instance. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act request on the Obama White House. The issue was the negotiations with Iran relating to the nuclear program. And the fact that they had initially had a video up that the edit was so obvious of what they took out that all of our team here said that wasn't a glitch. That was a white flash edit on purpose. So because we have really smart people in our media teams, so we took the intelligence of our video teams and sent out a FOIA request to the State Department. Had to go to court, had to fight them. We won. We get an email that shows what happened, which we knew would happen, was, of course, somebody intentionally edited this piece out, which would have disclosed what was really going on. But we found an email that said that they were trying to quote, this is from Jen Psaki, who's now the White House press spokesperson, shut down and battening down the hatches on any public discussions of negotiations. Now, while you have individual negotiations, I understand those can't be public. But they were parroting one story to the public, that we've got a more moderate president coming in, and that's why we've started this, when in fact they started the negotiation with the previous president. So issues that the ACLJ engages in, like Freedom of Information Act litigation, how important is that?
Yeah, it's really important. And to get the machine to respond to these things, you said how many years it took you.
5.
I saw this time and time again. I was in charge of the State Department, and to get the State Department to respond to things, right? The team beneath me would say, yes, sir, we're working on it, and then weeks would go by. And so you just had to continue to hammer this idea that we have bureaucrats operating in ways that are disconnected. By the way, full transparency. I want the State Department today to do what President Biden wants them to do. This is their mission. It's not to execute my mission. It's the president's mission.
Right, exactly.
But it's Republican administrations that suffer this because the people who will be career people, they'll stay there all the time, tend to be left of center, tend to have come there, and they have taken over these machines in ways that really undermine what the American people deserve.
From the outside looking in, it just seems like what you just said. When the new administration comes in and it happens to be Democrat to the left, it's tough to see the difference between the bureaucrats and the political appointees. They're all so in line with the ideology that they are willing to even act. Sometimes we saw it under the Obama years, the IRS.
Yeah, sure.
But certainly at the State Department, they're willing to act in a political manner, which violates their own rules as bureaucrats. But it's tough to see the difference between who is actually a political appointee and who is someone who has made this their career.
So we were able ultimately, and it took us too long, but we were ultimately able to get really talented political appointees that were in there just, they're pipe hitters, getting after it, demanding that the bureaucracy respond to the demands of what I was trying to do, what the president was trying to do. But it shouldn't be that hard. It should be that you provide the commander's intent and the machine executes, the bureaucracy executes. Instead, they resist, they undermine, they leak back and forth between the State Department and Congress. I could go on about this for hours, truly in an effort to undermine the foreign policy of the United States of America.
Folks, let me take a minute of your time here because this is a really critical month for the ACLJ. These are our most critical months of the year, and we like doing this way so that we don't have to spend a lot of our broadcast doing a fundraising pitch to you most of the year. But these months, we really do have to tell you how we bring you the broadcast, how we bring you all the experts, how we have team members like Mike Pompeo and Rick Rennell, how we're planning on the fight for life. Even after the Supreme Court case, it's all because of your financial support. Be part of our matching challenge at aclj.org today.
When we see something, when we hear something, when we're concerned about an issue, we don't just talk about it. We do something about it. And that goes to our Government Accountability Project.
The things that are important are knowing where to look and who to look at. What we're trying to do is get information that we, the people, are entitled to. We sort of call them puzzle pieces because we don't know which ones we're going to need in the long run. But you gather all the puzzle pieces together, and then you start to put them together to uncover the truth, really.
The Freedom of Information Act, that's a statute that allows us to get information from the government. Starts with a letter from our offices in Washington to these agencies. And it says, give us this information on these topics. And generally, they don't. And then we go to court.
We go through a series of lengthy negotiations back and forth about what they'll give or what they won't give. We may get tons of information that's redacted, and we have to then go back and say, you redacted too much. We can't really find out what you're giving us because it makes no sense. So it goes through a process of litigation.
That is how you get information, and that office is going to be more active now more than ever.
The ACLJ has been extremely active in vigorously seeking to hold these bureaucrats accountable. We have filed hundreds of FOIA requests. We have received over 20,000 pages of documents in our litigation.
How was our government operating? What were they driving at? What was their agenda? What was their motive? And I will tell you, I mean, sometimes the picture that it paints is one of terrific abuse.
You're finding a nugget in a gold mine. Occasionally you'll come up with something that is really a bombshell, but you have to persist in doing it, and that's what we do.
That's a little bit of what we do through our Office of Government Accountability, and of course that comes under our Office of Government Affairs. So your support of the ACLJ supports all of that.